I'm going to talk about why most feedback don't work or doesn't work. Let's start off by reviewing a feedback model that would be quite useful for us in building relationships. Now, as you know, all good relationships depend on feedback. We can be direct without being abrasive by using what we call behaviorally specific feedback. This is a crucial competence that allows you to raise any difficulties in a way that minimizes defensiveness from the other side. It not only resolves interpersonal issues, but also is a key for personal learning and for building meaningful relationships. Now, in this particular model, you see that there are two parties, okay, in a particular issue, and there is this common reality in between them. Unfortunately, we cannot really detect or immediately sense on what the intent is. Okay. And even if we can trust the other person disclosing explicitly the intent, it may not be the full picture. What we can observe would be two things: the behavior that happens within that common reality and the impact that you yourself would actually be receiving. Things like feelings, reactions, and responses. Now, when we start attributing certain things to intent, that is the time that we say we're actually going over the net. Now, generally, people don't use this particular feedback model. They don't stick with their reality, but go over the net in making attributions about the other. People may say, you just don't want to cooperate. You just want to dominate this discussion. You only think about yourself, or you don't care. And in this case, you'd see that we are trying to attribute a lot of the problems to what the other side is intending or what we think they're intending. And you know our stance about how we express feelings, right? Sometimes when we say, I feel you're putting me one down, or I feel you're trying to criticize me or not even care about me, well, that's not actually feelings, that's attribution of intent. Okay. No wonder feedback can cause so much hurt and it can cause so much defensiveness, given the likelihood that the other person will feel misunderstood or attacked. Now, it's pretty weird, perhaps ironic, that we can see certain kids actually fare better in this type of feedback model. They know how to stay on their side of the net more than the adults. Now, adults often fall into the trap of thinking that they know what the other person's motives and intentions are. Now, but unless they've explicitly told us, what we surmise is only a hypothesis, a hunch, a guess, which may not be true. Their intentions are their reality, not yours, not ours. Furthermore, it's rare that the intentions themselves are the problem. As you'd probably uh, have experienced, intentions can be quite convoluted. It can be quite complex. It's not a simple one-dimensional reality. Okay. Now, as you can probably recall, there's this old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's the reason why we've heard this advice for so many for so many years is that intentions are not enough. Sometimes we can be good-willed, but being good-willed is like table stakes. It's just what gets you through the door, but to go inside the room and really thrive, well, intentions are not enough, definitely. So us trying to pinpoint the problem to the other person's intentions, that's not really fair, and more often than not, it's not enough. Rather, the problem is with their behavior, okay, as expressed in the common reality, and on how it impacts you. And there can be many reasons why a person, even with the best of intentions, they act in ways that the other person might feel or find problematic. Now, feedback also goes awry or it goes downhill when the person giving it thinks they're describing someone's behavior, but they're really not. It's like a sort of devious or shrewd thing to do. You're trying to pinpoint a particular behavior, but it's not really the behavior that you're pointing out. Okay. Now, behavior is something that you can point to. It is an objective reality. And if you want to have a better word, behavior should be observable. Okay. Now, words, gestures, and even silence, not talking, they're all forms of behavior because this is something that you can observe. Now, a useful test is to ask if people were shown a behavior of the interaction, would they agree they saw the same behaviors as you did? Okay. Or another way, uh, if you say you are dominating the discussion, let's take that statement for a while. You are dominating the discussion. Do you think the other person would actually make the same assessment as you would have? Okay. And in that case, it's not really an observable behavior. It's a judgment made by you based on a series of behaviors. So it's a conclusion. Okay. It's not the observation. Okay. What did the other do that has led you to that conclusion? Now that's a bigger question. And that is something that you should provide as feedback to that other person. In the case of you are dominating the discussion, what might have been observable behaviors? Were they interrupting you? Were they dismissive, perhaps? Or were they acting as if they're bored or not listening? Okay. Or were they the types who would keep on pushing the point or monopolizing the discussions? Now, those things, okay, they can be viewed objectively. Okay. Those are behaviors. And these are the things that you should point out to the other person. Now, it might seem to be nitpicking, like splitting hairs. But insofar as the other has a tendency to deny your feedback, the more specificity you provide, the more specific, the more observable, the more tangible feedback that you can provide, the more difficult it is for them to deny it. It's harder for them to dismiss the feedback when you point out the four times in which, for example, you didn't let them, you were not allowed to finish your point. You were interrupted a lot of times. It is those behaviors that led you to see them as perhaps dominating the discussion, but that is your conclusion. When you give feedback, you don't just simply say your conclusion, you actually say the observation. Okay. And how that observation impacted you. Okay. So the problem, as we see it right now, is that more often than not, when we give feedback, we just go straight away to the conclusion. Sometimes we think, well, it's simple, let's just cut the middleman. Boom, I just tell you the conclusion. No, remember, the objective here is to actually cultivate and strengthen the relationship. And that's a process. Okay. So we can't really just go right away to the conclusion. On the contrary, we should be very, very specific with the behavior that you have observed and articulating the impact of that behavior to you. Now, another common problem with feedback is that you're not always aware of all the ways you have been impacted by someone else's behavior. Okay. And that becomes a bit of a challenge. It's important that when you recognize your reactions and especially your feelings, this is your domain, this is your expertise, and this becomes the basis of your influence.